After months of social distance to cut COVID-19, many people have paid the price, among them a merino sheep in Australia. When it's time for a haircut, even people with long locks have a simple task as opposed to an overgrown fleece weighing 78 pounds. A 35 kilograms mound of overgrown, matted fleece. The sheep was found by a member of the public and then contacted Edgar's Mission Farm Sanctuary. The merino ram dubbed Barrack by rescuers was discovered wandering alone with an extraordinary overgrown wool coat and was promptly shunned to save his life. Carl Barron from the Edgar's Mission Farm Sanctuary said that it appeared Barrack was once an owned sheep who had escaped. Merino sheep do not shed their fleece and need to be shun at least annually as their wool continues to grow. The hirsute or vine was found near Land's Field in Victoria, and rescuers said he had eked out an existence, eating small shoots of grass. He had at one time been ear-tagged. However, these appeared to have been torn out by the thick matted fleece around his face. He was in a bit of a bad way. He was underweight, and due to all of the wool around his face, he could barely see. Barrack is the latest in a long line of very large and woolly sheep to make international headlines. Domesticated sheep usually undergo annual shearings to keep their coats in check. However, this particular ram nicknamed Barrack was roaming wild in a state forest in Victoria, Australia. He hadn't been shown in years, and his fleece had grown into a dense gargantuan mass. By the time he was captured and brought to Edgar's Mission Farm Sanctuary for rescued farm animals in Lancefield, Victoria, their Barrack was finally shown of his heavy woolly burden, which was weighed about as much as a 10-year-old child. Under the pounds of matted wool stained with dirt studded with twigs and crawling with insects was not Australia's answer to the Yeti, but a sheep. At one point in the past, Barrack had an owner as he had been castrated in muleys, a practice that removes skin from around a sheep's tail, creating smooth scar tissue that deters blowflies. According to the Australia's Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, RSPCA, his ears also showed signs of tagging, though the tags were long gone, possibly torn out by the weight of his overgrown coat. According to Edgar's Mission, photos of Barrack before his haircut show the sheep's muzzle poking out of an enormous and very crusty wool cocoon. When Barrack was standing, only his hooves and a small section of his lower legs were visible. When he laid down, his legs disappeared entirely. The load of wool around his head was so heavy that it partly hid his face, and the fleece's weight pulled on his lower eyelids, exposing his eyes to grit and dust. He had a painful ulcer in one eye from a stuck grass seed. According to the mission representative, evidence from mitochondrial DNA, which comes from a separate genome inside mitochondria or energy-making cells in wild and modern sheep, indicates that domesticated sheep are descended from the mufflon Ovis orientalis, and the domestication began around 11,000 years ago in the fertile present. Researchers reported in 2018 in the Erosion Journal of Applied Biotechnology. Over thousands of years, sheep were selectively bred to produce wool for human use, and domesticated sheep no longer shed their coats seasonally as their wild relatives do. Left unshorn, their woolly coats continue to grow. Overgrown coats create health hazards for the sheep, making them prone to injury and infections and hampering the animal's ability to regulate their body temperature. Shrek. So, no one could cut your hair? Shrek was just your ordinary merino sheep living in South Island, New Zealand. This is until the year 2004, when he skyrocketed to fame over his ginormous wool coat. Usually, merino sheep have their coats shed once a year, but Shrek the sheep hated nothing more than having his coat removed, and so he devised the plan to avoid shearing forever. He was going to escape and run away. For 6 years, Shishi's escape proved successful after he got out of his enclosure and made a break for it, spending his time hiding in local caves. Eventually, Shrek was discovered. Although he looked nothing like the Shrek his owner, John Perriam, remembered. When John saw Shrek again, it reminded him of some biblical creature. Some breeds of sheep naturally shed their wool each year, but merino sheep, typically raised for meat, never shed their fleece. Hidden behind cave walls far from any shearing blades, Shrek's wool continued to grow and grow and grow some more. In fact, after 6 years without any haircuts, Shrek had enough wool to produce 20 suits for men, large men. Each year, Shrek continued to grow the normal amount of hair for merino sheep, but since it was never shed or cut off, he was found with 6 times the average amount of merino fleeces. His fleece in total weighed around 60 pounds. This caused many to ask if sheep fleece would continually grow forever without being sheared. Dave Thomas, the head of sheep studies in the University of Wisconsin-Madison, says that the merino sheep will forever continue to grow incredible amounts of wool without being sheared. Almost all year long, this type of sheep continues to pack on the fleece. So, is it ever dangerous to have so much fleece? Dave Thomas admits that all of this wool can become a health and safety concern for sheep, especially if they are in very hot conditions, in which case heat stress can become a real issue. Also, if a sheep's wool becomes too large, they can get stuck on their backs, unable to get up. Shrek is not the only sheep to hate the shearing processes, although it's a quick and pain-free ordeal that sheep get more and more comfortable with as they age. Baby sheep tend to have the most disdain for shearing, causing a lot of commotion the first few times they experience the process. Once they learn it is not painful and doesn't negatively impact their life, they tend to become docile about it. When done by an experienced individual, shearing only takes around 5 to 10 minutes max. Shrek hardly looked anything like a sheep with so much fleece. In fact, his eyes appeared to be completely covered. People couldn't get enough of the cute little rebel. And so, when he finally was sheared, it was broadcasted on New Zealand's national television for all to witness. Shrek was also famous enough to meet the Prime Minister of New Zealand at the time, Helen Clark. All of Shrek's fleece was eventually auctioned off to support medical charities for children. Shrek had since been depicted in children's books and made his fair share of charity appearances, after a watchful eye, of course. After all, Shrek is a runaway rebel sheep at heart. 2 years after Shrek was first shared on national television, he was shared for live TV again, this time floating on an iceberg just off the coast of Dunedin, New Zealand. Sadly, the adorable and rebellious sheep passed away in 2011 at 16 years old. Chris. In 2015, a hiker was out trekking through Street Mulligan's Flat, a protected nature reserve in Canberra, Australia. It's popular for its vast array of wildflowers, with approximately 150 species to be found there. However, on this day, it wasn't a wildflower that caught the hiker's eye, but something much more discerning. The object in question resembled a fallen cloud or a heap of cotton balls. However, as the man investigated, they noticed that it was grazing on the grass. It was then that he realized that he was looking at a sheep, one that they had never seen before. The sheep had been so neglected that its fleece had grown to epic proportions. This unfortunately meant that the sheep could barely walk due to the weight. The hiker was worried about the sheep's welfare and thought it wouldn't survive the harsh Australian heat under all the wool. So he reached out to Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Australia. Thankfully, the welfare charity took the sheep in under the care and later renamed him Chris. It was speculated that Chris was perhaps roaming around in the bush for more than 6 years without anyone to share him. His wool had grown out of control. The sheer size of Chris's mane wasn't the only concern, as vets were worried that his massive fleece could be hiding a number of infections or parasites. If Chris had fallen over in the wild, he would have no way of getting back to his feet and likely wouldn't have survived. The charity appealed for a shear online in order for them to assess any serious medical injuries that he could have. Ian Elkins heard about the appeal and offered up his services. Ian is a big name in the Australian sheep shearing world, having won the national championship for the practice 4 times. However, Chris was Ian's biggest challenge yet. Taming Chris's wool would most definitely be tricky, as the weight of his fleece was dragging his skin down, which can make cuts a possibility when shearing. All the time in the wilderness by himself made Chris, as you can imagine, fearful towards humans. Ian knew that it was not going to be a walk in the park and most likely take a few rounds of shearing to get it all. But he was determined that he was the right man for the task in hand. Chris was sedated for his big haircut, and in the end, Ian managed to cut off all Chris's fur without an incident. The process did, however, manage to break a number of world records, including the longest sheep shearing session over at 45 minutes, a little bit longer than the normal 2 minutes. Chris's excess wool tipped the scales at a whopping 89 pounds, around 8 times more than an average merino sheep would produce. Following the record break in shearing, Chris's fleece was put permanently on display at the National Museum of Australia. His fleece is used as part of an exhibition representing the history of the wool industry in Australia. It also shows the importance of animal welfare. In September 2015, Chris was sent to live at the Little Oak Sanctuary in Braewood, Australia, where he thrived until his passing in 2019 due to old age. He was about 10 years old. In his later life, he'd grown quite fond of his home visitors and head scratches. Do you know of any more sheep with a lot of wool on them? Let us know in the comments below, as we love hearing what you have to say. Thanks for watching. See you next time.